Just
Alright.
slowly fall off
Here
the
we go.
couch.
Alright, I'm Emmy Roberts. This is.
Dawson Lowe.
I'm Jonathan Manning.
Brandon Kelly.
Alright, and we're doing Tim Burton as our director. And I guess we're first going to talk about Vincent.
So Vincent is a short film, and it's about a boy. It's not set in a certain time, but you guys would say it's about like a boy who's like has a wild imagination, and he's thinking what was the actor's name?
Vincent Price.
Yeah.
He thinks, or at least he's inspired by the actor Vincent Price, who was a famous horror movie actor in the 1950s, 60s, black and white, like Roger Corman era of movies. Not exactly like the B movies, but the more like, once we started recovering from the really like giant spiders, the blob, like bad special effects B movies, he was the actor that kind of took over.
And the whole short film was basically allusions to the movies.
Yeah,
that he was
it's
in.
pretty much references
Like
to
the Wax.
Vincent Price's movies.
House of Wax and
House of Wax, The Last Man on Earth.
the zombies could have been Thriller.
I believe, the zombies could be Thriller, but I believe that was The Last Man on Earth that actually had zombies in them as well.
Alright.
And it's also is it narrated?
It's
by
narrated
Vincent?
by
the
Vin-
actual actor,
Yeah.
and and he's doing like a poem. It's kind of like a
It's like a
Dr.
poem.
Seuss.
Yeah.
He's doing a poem, and everything rhymes, and he's narrating, what this little boy Vincent is imagining and dreaming about, and it's about how like Vincent just takes like normal everyday things, and he like his imagination takes them and relates them to Vincent Price's actual career, and it wanders off into like a dark, wonder-filled land. I don't know. It's weird.
All this is
Tim-
contrasted by the, the bright light of his modern life, just kind of like interjecting into his imagination.
Mhm.
And then
And
when
then-
he,
Yeah, his mom comes in occasionally. It's kind of like the
Brings him back to reality.
brings
Yeah.
him back to
Mhm.
reality.
it's like dark when he's all alone and depressed, and then
Yeah.
yeah.
Because like
Takes
the
him out of
tone of it's more
imagination.
black and white and just like Tim Burton style, and everything's like very exaggerated, like his eyes and everything.
Oh, and it's claymation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's
claymation.
claymation,
Yeah, very important.
And then like every time he comes back to like reality and his mom's talking to him, like his pupils get bigger because Tim Burton does like tiny pupils for like evilness and like beady eyes kind of. And then is that pretty much it? for the
Yeah,
first
I
one?
guess that pretty much sums up.
The first one.
Yeah, it was a very short film, so
Yeah,
yeah.
it was
Covered.
like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Alright, I guess we'll go on to Edward Scissorhands. The whole layout of that movie is just pretty much like Edward just never got finished, like being created, and a sweet little mom from like a small town found him, brought him in, and everybody like used him, and they didn't like actually like him, but like they just used him. And he was dark, and everybody else was colorful, just to show like how different he was. And that was really cool to see how Tim Burton did that, and like how everything he did was dark, but he did such happy things. So like,
Yeah, because he was created kind of up on this hill in like this giant haunted or spooky mansion or whatever.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
capsule.
By like a
sort of
yeah
thing.
like
it had
his,
like pretty bushes.
yeah it was like a
around.
famous like cookie maker and like inventor,
Yeah.
and so he created a boy, Edward, and he wasn't able to finish him. He didn't finish his hands, so instead of giving Edward hands, he had scissors and blades, so that way Edward could like cut cookies or something. I don't know, something weird like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then on that hill is like the dark mansion where Edward was made, and down below it is like this super bright, stereotypical like suburban neighborhood where like everything is supposed to be
60s,
happy.
Not
Yeah.
60s, like 30s too.
Leave
Yeah.
It to Beaver sort
Yeah,
of
we
style.
did
Yeah.
the Beaver style.
Mhm.
And then like the mom would sell makeup, like that Mary Kay line, how they used to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting how like, well, and this is a point that ties into all of his films, but like you can't actually pinpoint where it takes place, but you can pinpoint like certain like attributes from like a certain era. Like they all drove cars from like the 70s, but like yet their whole style and dress and attitude in the style of homes was like very reminiscent of like the 50s or the 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back from the war kind of
Yes.
stuff.
Mhm.
Oh, and what was the thing you said that he took inspiration from for Edward?
Oh,
for the
for
character?
Edward, the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which was like a 1920s silent expressionist German film. Oh, that's kind of like the inspiration, or I guess Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the book, would be the inspiration for everything, but it was the classic.
The image of him.
Yeah, the image of him is very reminiscent of of Edward.
Yeah.
And then
'Cause he has-
Frankenstein.
Frankenstein's
By-
very Frankenstein
yeah.
by
It's
Mary
basically
Shelley.
like a modern
Yeah.
take on Frankenstein. Yeah.
And he like got inspiration from that to show that Edward like wasn't the monster, and that like he was just really nice and sweet, and everybody just like took advantage of him. And it was really sad and all.
Yeah, so basically Edward, like there was this mom that was selling makeup, like you said.
Yeah.
She went up to the mansion on the hill to sell makeup. No one was home. Edward was living there by himself since the man who created him had died. And so she took him into the neighborhood, and Edward is, of
And
course,
all the moms were
in all,
calling.
yes, in
Yeah.
all black leather. He's got scissors for hands. He's got white makeup, and his hair is
Crazy
crazy and
hair.
black. He looks like he's from The Cure. And the mom takes him in, and of course all the moms in the neighborhood start gossiping.
And calling.
And
all
calling
that
and-
stuff.
I think what's interesting is the neighborhood and all the houses are so colorful, yet everyone there is so vain and like
And there's so many cliques, like that
Yeah,
religious woman
yeah,
got
it's-
left out because she was like,
it's all made to look nicer than it actually is, but on the
Yeah.
inside, there's something wrong with the community there. Yet Edward, he looks so terrible from the outside, but really on the inside, he's super innocent, he's super sweet, and there's lots of good in him. It's just you wouldn't get that visually.
yeah.
I think they went for like that 50s like houses and stuff like that, because that is like as far away as you can get from the
Yeah.
black leather.
It's very
Frankenstein.
conservative.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is it? It's like the American dream. Very
The
like
nuclear
family.
family.
Yeah.
Everyone's
Nuclear
together. Oh, and then all the husbands would leave. at
Yeah,
that
all the
time.
husbands would leave at the same
Yeah.
time to go to work. Everything was
And
super
they would all come
uniform.
back. Yeah. Crazy. And then, okay, I guess that pretty much sums up Edward Scissorhands. So we'll do Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Right. Who wants to talk about that?
Okay, so this is a remake of the 1971 movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which, honestly, this is a completely different movie, kind of, compared to that one. Cause
Like
it
the plot is the same.
It's
but
a
like,
similar thing, but they have like this part of his childhood, and they keep going back to that, and the imagery is way more kind of Tim Burton.
Dark,
It's
Yeah.
crazy
Yeah.
imagery.
It's more exaggerated. and
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
And it's ironic since it's one of the lighter Tim Burton films as far as like theme and tone. Like it's very bright and
Yeah.
like it's a lot more happy than any of his other films, and
Like
especially
when it's
like
in the factory.
especially in contrast Vincent, who's about a boy who is imagining all the sorts of horrid things, whereas Charlie is of course a boy from a poor house and he's imagining all sorts of great things, imagining
Yeah.
about going to the chocolate
Yeah.
factory.
And
Charlie-
he like lives in
it's-
that old house.
Yeah,
It's in black and run down. and
it's
stuff.
definitely a kid's movie compared
Yeah.
to his other
Yeah.
stuff.
And I mean, we shouldn't have to explain the plot of Charlie.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a pretty universal.
But
it's
like
pretty
I think comparing it to the old one and the new one, how like the old one, how Willy Wonka like dressed in all bright, like he had a purple suit and like that caramel top hat stuff.
Yeah.
And on this one, he's more like dark. It's more like maroon, and like all the rich kids are like wearing bright colors. And I guess it just showed like wealth, kind of. It reminded me like back in the days, like when wearing purple was like royalty.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
reminded me of like dyes or just like what kind of dye you wore. It showed like how rich you were and like where you were in the social standard or whatever. And then, yeah, and then what's his name? Charlie. He wore like all dark, and he was like living with his grandparents, taking care of them, and he just got lucky.
Yeah, it's in one of those things again where it's
Yeah.
like all the other. I think someone pointed out all the other kids that got the golden ticket were all dressed very bright and colorful,
Yeah.
and Charlie, of course, like Edward, who was like super bright and hopeful and innocent, was the one that was dressed super grungy, dressed in all black.
Yeah.
And except like on the inside, he was the one that was actually very sweet and nice and kind.
And kind of going back to Vincent, Vincent was like this kid with like a crazy imagination and thinking outside the box and all that jazz. But like, his mom would come in with the bright, sunny stuff, and it's like, why aren't you playing outside with the other kids?
Yeah.
I feel like that's how Tim Burton just like reflects himself on his films, because
Yeah.
he wears
Could be,
black
yeah.
all the time. But he's such a joyful person and everything. He's actually really nice. Like if you watch interviews of him.
Yeah,
He's
it
really
could,
cool.
it could be like his, what he feels as far as like people's view on him and how maybe he could have been
Yeah, and everybody just kind of
stereotyped or like labeled,
Yeah.
and then really that's not how or who he was.
Yeah, Zenon, you got anything else
Well,
to say?
actually, I think one more thing to note is on the new Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, on Tim Burton's version, it goes into Willy Wonka's backstory, which it didn't do
Yeah,
in
it
the
didn't do
original,
that
It didn't go into that
and
at
it
all.
created more
It's
of
his
a
dad.
depth
It's
of
sad.
character for.
Yeah, you can see why he's
Yeah, he
different.
wasn't some like mysterious figure who was like, oh, this is some magical world
And
that
it
we're
was-
walking into.
Yeah.
It was more of
Yeah.
a surreal kind of.
Yeah, you
Willy
can see
Wonka.
why he got into
Yes.
chocolate and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And yeah, and it wasn't a good reason either.
No,
it
he
was
like-
from
just as like
you know,
spite as
suppressed,
that.
like-
a bad childhood.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So again, those darker themes, even in a kids movie, very reflective of like Tim Burton, his style,
Yeah.
and his tone.
We should mention real quick that the town, like outside of the chocolate factory, was like the opposite of Edward Scissorhands, where that was all like bright in
Yeah.
the 1960s.
Yes.
This was like,
It was snowy.
1900s England.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. It was like
Mhm.
early 20th century England.
Yeah.
And then the chocolate factory, it was all bright and colorful on the inside.
Which is like not what you would expect. Like looking at the cover of like the movie, you would think Edward Scissorhands is like super dark and like emo,
Yeah.
and then you would think Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is like super bright and colorful because of candy.
Mhm.
And then just seeing that's really cool how he like reversed it on us.
Mhm.
But yeah. But that's it. All right. Hope you had a good time in New
Oh,
York.
wait.
Oh,
all
oh.
the movies have like. It's just like, I guess it would be important to mention that Tim Burton always has this like contrasting light and dark all throughout his movies. Even though
Yeah.
like you look at Edward Scissorhands and you look at Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and they're way different designs, but they still have the light and dark like,
Themes.
themes. Yeah.
Yeah.
He has in every single one of his films. Like everything's just very contrast, and it's very like appealing to like mostly everybody's eye. It's appealing to my eye just to like see.
And then there's
And-
always
Different.
that, like, again, like you said, that reflection of him. There's always that
Yeah.
one character that's kind of a reflection of.
And nobody looks at his movies like that. There's like, oh, that movie Tim Burton's
Yeah.
weird. I'm like, no, he's not. Like everything has a purpose. He does everything for a reason. So.
Even in the like new Alice in Wonderlands, it's like this is a pretty obvious one, but the real world's like dark and drab, or just
like blues. He loves
blues.
like blue undertones and all that stuff.
And then you go into Wonderland, it's obviously going to be bright. I mean,
Yeah.
it's still pretty dark in Wonderland, but
I
it's-
think
there's more
it's
color.
brighter.
one difference between Charlie and Chocolate Factory and Edward Scissorhands is that the colorful part was actually the dreary part, and the dark, like the colorful neighborhood was actually dreary and not a good place to live, and the house on the hill with Edward was actually the nice homey,
Yeah.
But in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the actual dreary part was
Where they
very
live.
dreary,
Yeah.
and the Chocolate Factory was bright and stayed true to being bright.
I guess that's
Good
how
point,
he
yeah.
changed like over.
Yeah, he still
'Cause
had
he
that
made-
contrast of light
Yeah,
and
but
dark,
in
but he
Edward,
didn't
he made
reverse
that in
it.
the 90s,
Like in
and
Edward.
then
Yeah.
that he made in 2006. So I guess he just like flipped it because I guess he likes showing that.
It's kind of odd that the dreary stuff was like, I don't know, I guess it had like more of a point, like the dreary stuff is he wants to make that look brighter, or not brighter, but like have more of a heart, and the brighter stuff is more shallow. But then he kind of flipped it and went to the traditional like dark is dreary and light is, happy and stuff.
Well, now that I think about it, actually, in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, could you not say that even though it was a poor, rundown, dark, dreary house, where Charlie lived, that was really
Really
where
happy.
all the
It was
life
really
in
hopeful.
it was.
It
Yeah,
was
it
a
was
lot of
very
heart.
hopeful.
Because there's so much.
And the
family.
chocolate factory, even though it was bright, it was filled with sadness because
Even
Willy
with his,
Wonka and his backstory
Yeah,
was doing it for the
yeah.
wrong purposes.
Yeah.
his backstory, it was just like this sad kid trying to
Yeah.
like spite his father, essentially.
And so, like, his whole factory he had created was again reflecting Willy Wonka's like sad childhood. So there wasn't happiness really.
Yeah,
in the
it was.
factory.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. Okay, that's cool.
So I guess he did do the same thing in Edward Scissorhands and in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah.
Cool.
I see, yeah.
Well, I guess.
All right.
I guess that's a wrap.
I guess that's a wrap. All right. Hope you had a good time in New York. Bye.